In this section, I will go over factoring quadratic trinomials with the leading coefficient equals 1. So as you remember, the standard form of quadratic trinomial is ax squared plus bx plus c, where a, b, and c are numbers and x is a variable. Now, if the leading coefficient a equals 1, then your quadratic trinomial will turn into their simplest form, which is x squared plus bx plus c. So let's say I need to factor x squared minus 2x minus 3. So before I start factoring, I'll tell you in general, if you have x squared plus bx plus c, the factored form will look like this. You'll have, I call it a 2 by 2, with parentheses, which will contain binomial and another binomial, so the product of two binomials, and x and x you'll have on the first place, because the only way to get the x squared is to take x and multiply x. Now, the only thing we need to figure out is two numbers, and I don't know them yet, so I'll call them m and n, what I do know about them, that the product of those two numbers I'm looking for equals to c, and the sum of them equals to b. So the whole idea will be to find those two numbers and place them inside of parentheses. So let's go back to our example, and as we know, the result is a 2 by 2, and then the x and x on the first spot, that's given. So now I need to find those two numbers, which is m and n. Always start with a product. So the product equals to c, which is the constant in our case is -3. And the sum of those numbers equals to b, in our case is -2. Before you start looking for those numbers, define the sign. So the product of numbers we're looking for is negative, meaning you're dealing with one positive number and one negative. The only way to get negative result is to multiply positive with negative. Now, which one number is higher? When you add those two numbers, the result is negative as well, meaning the negative number we're looking for will be bigger than the positive. That's the only way when you combine them you get negative result. So the negative number is higher. And then I start going through the numbers and see if it works. So since we always start with a product, I'm thinking, okay, I need to come up with two numbers that I'll multiply and I'll get 3. So I'll start with the smallest one, 1 and 3. So I know that the negative is higher, so I placed 1 being positive and 3 being negative. And then I'll check. Positive 1 times -3 equals -3, so that works. Then what happens if I'll add them? Positive 1 I'll add with -3. The result is -2, so it checked out. Meaning the two numbers I'm looking for is a positive 1 and -3. So all I need to do is to place them back in the parentheses. So that will be x plus 1 times x minus 3. Let's do one more. Let's factor x squared minus x minus 2. Process is the same. That's 2 by 2, x and the x in the first spot. Now I need to come up with those two numbers, and I know that the product of them is, again, it's my constant, which is -2, and the sum of them is the coefficient of x, which is -1. starting with the product and with the sign. The numbers I'm looking for, if I multiply them, the result is negative again, meaning I'm dealing with one positive and one negative. And similar to the first example, when I combine them, result is negative, meaning negative number is higher. So the product of two numbers is negative 2. So I would assume it's 1 and minus 2. 1 times negative 2 is negative 2. Now let's add them. 1 and minus 2 equals negative 1, checked out with the addition, meaning the numbers I was looking for is 1 and negative 2. So that will be plus 1 minus 2. And one more example. Let's factor x squared minus 8x plus 15. So beginning is the same. I'm gonna put 2 by 2, and I'll put x in the first spot, and then I'll need to come up with the two numbers inside of parentheses. So starting with the fact that the product of those numbers equals 15, and the sum of them equals negative 8. So the product equals 15, which is positive. So the way to receive the positive result when you multiply in numbers is to multiply two positives or multiply two negatives. So negative times negative will give you positive as well. So which option will be ours? Let's look at the addition. When you add those two numbers, the result is negative, meaning they cannot be both positives. If you add both positives, you would get positive results. So they have to be two negative numbers. So now we know we're looking for the two negative numbers, and the result, the product is 15. So I would say I'll use negative 3 and negative 5, and then I need to see if that's the right numbers. If I add them, is that negative 8? So negative 3 plus negative 5 is in fact negative 8. So the numbers are good. Minus 3, minus 5.